All right, and now it's time for our presentation. So our presenter tonight might be familiar to some of you, having spoken at our club 2 years ago, exactly 2 years ago, at Kendall. But for those of you who have not had the pleasure, tonight's speaker is an evolutionary ecologist who's interested in understanding how humans change the way that closely related species interact and shift their evolutionary trajectories. As a mentor, a teacher, advocate, storyteller, and more, our speaker builds upon a foundation of natural history while intentionally weaving field studies and genomics together to study hybridization in the context of human change. For her dissertation research, she founded and directed the Boulder Chickadee Study, which perhaps you remember from a couple years ago, a citizen science network of over 75 households and 400 nest boxes to explore the natural histories of Colorado chickadees and understand how humans are shifting evolution for species living alongside us. This evening, she's going to dig into details of one way in which mountain chickadees have adapted to coexist with a closely related and ecologically similar species, the black-capped chickadee. So please join me in a warm welcome back to tonight's speaker, Kathryn Grabenstein, who will be presenting mountain chickadees change their tune when they live beside black-capped chickadees. Kathryn?
That was a riveting expose of Robert's Rules of Order. I'll have none of that today. So my name is Kathryn. I'm currently a Rose postdoctoral fellow here at the Lab of Ornithology, and I'm really excited to chat with y'all about chickadees. As Stephanie mentioned, I spoke a couple of years ago. Some things have changed. So I have some new things to share. Some things are going to be the same. I promise I will talk about chickadee song, but we're going to get there in like a really roundabout way. I'm going to talk a little bit about my path to being a scientist, because it's pretty niche to study birds for a living. And then we're going to touch a little bit on hybridization, because I just can't help myself. Then we'll get to song. And then in some kind of crazy, wild way, I'm going to wrap it all up together and hopefully tie it up with a nice bow. Okay, so here we go. Stephanie already kind of gave you a little bit of this, but I'm an evolutionary ecologist. I'm interested in understanding how closely related, ecologically similar species coexist. I do this through hybridization in the context of urbanization, but if you ask my mom, I study birds. Thank you. I paid him for that. I'm also a mentor, a teacher, an advocate, and a storyteller. And my favorite part about being a scientist is that I get to wear all of these hats at once. And today I'm going to tell you how I combined all of these pursuits to found and then later direct the Boulder Chickadee Study so we can learn more about Colorado chickadees. And in doing so, I hope to convince you of three things. The first is that how I came to be a scientist and how I do science are really one and the same, which is that science is still practiced by people. The second is that people matter, and I think arguably your network is your most valuable resource. There's a lot of feedback on that. 3, the best things in life are a little bit science, a little bit art, and a little bit of luck. Okay, we're gonna jump right in, brace yourself. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, not in the suburbs, in the northern neighborhoods. And this was the Chicago of the 90s, right? So the Bulls dynasty is alive and well on the quest for their second three-peat. But also, this is a concrete jungle. There's not a lot of green space. But what Chicago lacks in verdant forests, it more than makes up for with world-class museums. So I spent a lot of my childhood going to places like the Field Museum. And they don't really build buildings like this anymore. And nothing really kind of touches that moment of being a 6-year-old and staring up into something like the jaws of Sue, which at the time was the biggest T-Rex, but is no longer, but that's okay. I was also pretty artistic, very much so, danced to the beat of my own drum. Lord bless my mother. And if this is relevant for some of you, I'm an Aries and also a middle child, which really means I love a microphone. So I'm so thankful to be here today. When I was 6, I moved from the inner city of Chicago to the great state of Appalachia, And there I traded the sounds of sirens for cicadas, and this is where I really fell in love with being outside. Instead of running around the corner store, I was getting dirty with my brothers and playing and making mud cakes. And this is really where I claim to be as home. It's also where I first experienced the grammatical masterpiece that is all y'all. And I'm really proud to be from the cradle of Jack, Dolly, and salamanders. But of course, when I turned 18, I rebelled and I went back north and landed in Ithaca at Cornell University. I loved biology, and I knew that I was definitely not pre-med, and that was really as far as I had gotten. And I was really lucky in the first semester of my freshman year. I took a field biology course, and amidst this incredible backdrop of African biodiversity, I realized that you could study animals for a living, and I was hooked. This is me holding an ant in a tube, and I'm so excited. And my enthusiasm didn't go unnoticed, so the instructor of the course, Dr. Irby Lovett, asked me if I wanted to join his research group, and me being the smug 18-year-old that I was like, yeah, I guess I'll have to see if it works with my class schedule. And a couple weeks later, I started at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And I should mention at this point in my life, I'm 18 years old. I have never used a pair of binoculars. I can name about 10 birds. And this is kind of crazy to admit to this room, but I had never met a birder. I didn't know that birders existed, and I remember being like, wow, these people really love birds. And here I am 15 years later, still studying birds. So that's worked out great for me. I started in Mike Webster's lab working on the behavioral ecology of redback fairy wrens. I spent 3 field seasons in Australia, most notably in the Northern Territory, which is a wild place to send a bunch of undergrads, but they did it. And this is really where I kind of earned my fieldwork chops. I learned how to set up a mist net. It is good to have backups. We had some hawks fly through ours. They get ripped very easily. I also learned how to band and bleed birds, which is a magical... This is not a plug for the proposal since you've already voted on it, but it's really an incredible experience to hold some of these birds in the hand. I also got pretty good at color band reciting. These are fairy wrens. They're very tiny. That's a fly. I also learned how to conduct veg surveys. That's a piece of grass. And I collected it walking through a patch of grass that tall. And finally, how to use a pair of binoculars. I also learned other relevant life skills, such as how to get unstuck from mud. I didn't get this car stuck, but I did get it unstuck. And this will be a joy for some of you, but I also learned how to dress for success, how to fly a plane, and how to appreciate a shower with a view. And again, we're in the Northern Territory of Australia, so a tropical savanna, so it wasn't unexpected when our field site caught on fire and burned to the ground, but I learned what it looks like when the smoke blots out the sun. When I wasn't in the field, I spent a lot of time in the lab, and I mean a lot of time doing tens of thousands of extractions, and I finished up my time at Cornell on an honors thesis looking at black-throated blue warblers, that's a female, looking at whether or not females, if they're fed food, produce more sons or daughters. And I worked with Sarah Kaiser on this project. I'm so sorry. It's not me. It's the double. There's 2 mics up here, so really we're doomed to fail. Anyway, so at the lab, I spent a lot of time going to a lot of different seminars and workshops, and I really saw the power of the Lab of Ornithology to combine things like art and science and storytelling to really inspire people to care about the world and birds in particular. In 2014, I graduated. I knew I wanted to go to grad school, but I also needed a break. I was pretty tired. I took 2 gap years. The first stint I did was studying yellow-billed cuckoos in Southern California. I hated this job. These birds are so, thank you, yeah. These birds are so difficult to work on. I didn't love it. I got destroyed by mosquitoes. But I met a woman named Casey Schopnitz, and she will be relevant later. I also worked at Oak Ridge National Laboratory and the Climate Change Science Institute, basically taking a bunch of data from satellites and combining it with photos of trees that we take on the ground to study kind of the timing of the rhythms of life. And this is with Allison Boyer. I also did some non-sciencey things. I solo backpacked the Balkans in Central Europe during what would be the Syrian refugee crisis, which I didn't know at the time because I wasn't reading newspapers. But that was a wild time to be in that part of the world. And I worked at Trader Joe's. which taught me a lot about the human condition, is I think the way I will say that. In 2016, I started my PhD with Dr. Scott Taylor as his first graduate student in his brand new lab at CU Boulder. And once again, I moved across the country to really the biggest mountains I had ever seen in my entire life. And here, elevation dictates everything. When I started, Scott gave me kind of 3 pointers. He said Boulder, chickadees, and hybridization. And the rest was really up to me. So I'm going to briefly give you a definition for hybridization because we're going to talk about it a lot today. It's the interbreeding of individuals from 2 populations that are distinguishable by 1 or more heritable traits, or if you remember your biology textbook, a mule. Now, this is a really simple barnyard example, and we know that hybridization is actually really common in the wild. It's especially common in birds, and this is like just a little side plug, but I think hybridization is really, really cool. We can use it as a tool to look at the genes' underlying traits. It's long been touted as windows to the evolutionary process. It's also a pattern and a process in its own right that really has driven some of the most impressive radiations that we study to this day. It's also an artifact of many species lineages, including our own. So it's a pretty important phenomenon. That's all I'm going to say about that, but it's really cool. If you want to talk about it, find me later. Okay, so Scott gave me basically nothing because I was his first graduate student. So he said, study chickadees. There were no permits, no field sites, no pipettes, no precedent, no plan. It was really me and whatever I decided to put into this system. So now we're going to talk about chickadees. I know most people here are probably familiar with chickadees, so much so that someone once said to my face, I don't give a about chickadees. And that might have hurt my feelings, but I'm pretty confident that these are pretty great birds. So, thank you. Okay, so blackcaps are going to be in pink throughout the entirety of the talk. You know them. Obviously, I've cut off New York. I'm so sorry. At the time I was in Colorado, I didn't really care about the East. But they occur in high latitudes all the way from Nova Scotia to British Columbia. Mountain chickadees are going to be shown in blue. As their name suggests, they like mountains, so high elevation, drier, coniferous habitat. And the area in purple is where you get both. They look pretty similar. They're both gray, black, white. We're going to talk about this later, but they both sing pretty simple whistle songs. Ecologically, they're also really similar. They live in forests. They nest in these hollowed out cavities. They hide seeds that they eat throughout the winter so they don't have to migrate. But do they hybridize? Now, when most people think about chickadee hybridization, they think of ye old classic hybrid zone between black-capped and Carolinas, which happens not too far away from here. And the key thing with this hybridization is they hybridize everywhere they come into contact. I was unsure if black-capped or mountain chickadees hybridize, so I went to the literature like a good little graduate student and found everything I could find, which is not much. So this is a report from 1978 from somebody who was going through the collections in Harvard and found a bird from 1918. Here's another master's thesis from 1978, also out of New Mexico. And then one final report from 1996 from a breeding pair in Colorado, and that's it. There's 3 reports of these birds hybridizing in the literature. So that's not a great thing to be basing an entire PhD off of. But I just kept chugging along. So I said, okay, let's go to eBird and look at everywhere that people have seen birds that look like this, which is a wonky looking, half black-cap, half mountain looking thing. And I came up with this map. And if I squinted at it really hard, what came out appeared to me to be cities of the Mountain West. So you can see the Front Range of Colorado, you can see Salt Lake, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Cheyenne. And I thought, maybe there's something going on here, right? We don't see hybridization occurring everywhere where these birds are coming into contact throughout that purple zone, but instead in these really patchy areas. And maybe that thing is people. And so I came up with a really cute scientific name for this, which I call disturbance-mediated hybridization. That's a mouthful. And then I went back to the literature and said, where have we seen this happening? And I'm not going to talk about this a lot today, but the answer is we've seen it in a lot of different taxa from all over the world. And this is cases where people are having really, really large impacts on the landscape, and species that normally wouldn't hybridize are now hybridizing afterwards. I synthesized this in what's now a widely cited review. Again, not going to talk about this. It involves ants, which obviously I don't study. And I identified one outstanding question from this, which is, how exactly is this happening? Which is a pretty big question to ask. So I went back to the chickadees. Again, these things apparently don't hybridize as far as we know, but I'm just a tenacious little bugger. So I said, okay, do we see them hybridizing and does it correlate with habitat disturbance? I called upon my network and said, do you have chickadee samples? They said yes. And I analyzed them. And I'm going to step through this really, really quickly because we don't have a ton of time, but bear with me. Our x-axis is going to be how messed up the habitat is, and our y-axis is how hybridy a chickadee is. Again, this data set came from Allison Boyer, who I worked with at this point probably 3 to 5 years earlier. So it always pays to remember and keep good contacts with the people that you worked with. And I found a nice positive significant correlation. So again, that nice positive blue trend line, which is really satisfying. And excitingly, I found hybrids. So again, in the literature, there's 3 reports of these birds hybridizing. And from a genetic perspective, we actually found that they hybridize really commonly and throughout much of their range. So I was like, great, why? To do that, I needed 2 pieces. The first is really detailed field studies, and the second is a whole bunch of DNA. So I needed a place to do this where I could catch chickadees and also where chickadees were hybridizing. Fortunately for me, if I took a map of where I'd found all these genetic hybrids, overlaid a map of everywhere people had seen these hybridy-looking birds, the Front Range of Colorado popped out as a hotspot. So I was like, awesome, do these chickadees hybridize in Boulder? And to answer this, I then spent a whole bunch of time putting a bunch of wood together and founding the Boulder Chickadee Study as a research framework, a community science network, a teaching, mentoring, and outreach tool. Oh yeah, everyone always likes that one. Okay, as I mentioned, chickadees excavate cavities, and that's really great for them, but it's really bad for researchers because you can't get your hands in there to access them or the chicks. But they will nest in artificial cavities, also known as birdhouses. I was a grad student rocking on a grad student budget, so I didn't have money to buy these, so I decided to build them all myself. I didn't know how to do that. Thankfully, I knew people who did. They happened to be out in Tahoe, and this is their nest boxes. And it was there that I met Dr. Carrie Branch. She'll be important later. She sent me these really sick diagrams of how to build a box, and then I went back to Colorado and I got really busy cutting a lot of wood, loading up my car, and assembling hundreds. Yeah, it was great. Okay, they get this is the science part. They get numbers. They get this bad boy, and I love this photo because it shows that these work. This is a little metal piece to protect our investment so squirrels can't make that hole wider and get inside and have a snack and a home. Now, if you'll remember, I was pretty artistic, so my mom put me in screen printing class, so I knew that making a screen print was pretty easy, so I logoed all those bad boys. They were mini billboards. Now I needed to figure out where to put them. And my plan was to put them in these protected green spaces, which conveniently are green on this map. I tried for 2 years to get permits and failed, and frustrated, I pivoted and decided to instead put hundreds of boxes in the backyards of Boulder residents. But I didn't really know where to do that. Thankfully, if you remember Casey, she was from Boulder and her parents still lived there. And Mick Shopnitz was a good deadhead, so he was well connected with all of the deadheads that lived in Boulder. You think I'm joking, but this is very serious. And I said, Mick, I need a place to put hundreds of boxes. Can you help me? And he said, sure. And so he connected me to all his friends who connected me to their neighbors, and that's really how we built this thing from the ground up. I also wrote a little piece that was published in the Colorado Field Ornithologist Quarterly begging people basically to participate in this. And it wasn't always easy. This was a woman who emailed me on my birthday and made me cry and accused me of luring these birds to their deaths, which wasn't great. But in the end, it turns out all those months I had spent convincing people to buy really niche Trader Joe's products came in handy with convincing them to also let me put a box in their backyard and come a couple of weeks during the summer. So I was able to recruit, at this point it's about like 80, 90 households to this project. So then I had to put all these boxes up. And I like to show this photo because this is no small feat. I mean, like an individual human can hold 1, maybe 2, maybe you could stack 3 up to your chin, and we're moving these around, again, massive mountains, typically through deep snow. This is what it looks like in a really nice, clean version of where I ended up putting all of these 400 plus boxes. It took about a year. And I like to, again, point out the elevational scale of this thing is huge. It's about 6,000 feet. That's like going from here to Cayuga Lake about 12 times. So this white mash that you see on the left, that is the continental divide. And the tail end of those blue dots on the far left, that is tree line. So this is a huge elevational gradient that these boxes are spanning. We're going to show some pictures because I just like to show the habitats. So our lowest elevation site down in the city of Boulder at a mere 5,000 feet. These boxes are in folks' backyards. I wanted to put boxes on campus so I could incorporate them into classes. Turns out the person to ask to do that is the head arborist. This is Vince. He's great. Mid-elevation site, again, 6,000 to 8,000 feet, pretty high up. This is mostly ponderosa pine, a little bit of aspen. We're beginning to see spruce and fir. Dirt track roads, those are a couple of 14ers in the background. And also Colorado is a place that's chock full of mining. So I learned pretty quickly when I went out to people's properties to ask where the old mine shafts were. So I didn't fall into them. This is an old tungsten mine on one of the sites that I worked on. Lots of also mountain lions like to hang out here. It was great fun. And then our highest elevation site all the way up to 11,000 feet, this is tree line. That is where trees no longer grow. And we do have mountain chickadees that nest all the way up here. So again, mostly blue spruce and Douglas fir. Key thing is that this elevational distribution of boxes is spanning where mountains and blackcaps breed. So again, we're getting everybody. Okay, while I was out here, now I told you we were going to get to the song part, I noticed that the mountain chickadees sang really weirdly. The blackcaps I recognized. They sounded something like this, which kind of sounds like cheeseburger if you subscribe to that. This is what I thought the mountains were going to sound like. All the recordings from basically nearby places in Colorado had songs that sounded like this. So this is what I thought I would hear. Like, sounds pretty good. This is what I was hearing. So these footsteps are my footsteps. I apologize. This is recorded on my iPhone. Bless him. So I went back to Carrie, who happened to study song for her PhD, and I said, Carrie, these chickadees sound really weird. And she said, they do. Let's study them. So we decided to describe chickadee song in Colorado, and the really key thing here is we have two species of chickadee that are co-occurring, right? We have black-capped and mountains, which is really unique that we have these two closely related species that are supposed to sound kind of similar, but when you get them together, maybe one of them sounds different. Again, luck played into my hand here. So Carrie she had finished her PhD in Reno, and she was now doing her postdoc at, you guessed it, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in Ithaca. So she recorded a bunch of blackcaps from basically sapsucker woods. And she had old recordings of mountain chickadees back out from Reno. And I was in Boulder where we had both. So this was a little COVID project. We went out and recorded a bunch of chickadee songs. This looks something like this. The bird sings. You put out a little microphone. Goes into a little memory chip that gets plugged into a computer. That goes into a software program. Most people are familiar with Raven, and spits out what's called a spectrogram. Please stay with me. We're going to talk about it just a little bit. Okay, our x-axis is time, typically seconds. Y-axis is frequency. That's going to be something like kilohertz. Big thing also is this spectrogram is showing how loud the sound is. So the brighter that picture, the louder the noise. And then we get to get this cute. Yeah, so that's how we turn something like a sound into a picture that we can then analyze. And by we, I mean Olivia Taylor, who was of no relation to my PhD advisor. Okay, so she analyzed a bunch of chickadee songs. We take a ton of measurements. Again, time here is on our X, frequency is on the Y. We measure things like how long the song is, how long each individual note is, the number of notes in a song. We call this the frequency ratio, but it's the difference between the starting frequency and the ending frequency. We do that for the whole song and then for every individual note. We also measure the note spacing. So there's a ton of stuff that's going into these songs. And I should also mention that for each individual bird, we have at least 7 songs. So at the end of the day, Olivia analyzed 2,000 songs. That's a lot. Thank you. That's the appropriate noise to make. That's a lot. Okay, I'm going to show you, again, just some representative songs. pink here, if you remember, is going to be our black-capped chickadees that are from Boulder. This darker pink is going to be black-caps that are from Ithaca. Light blue is going to be our mountains from Boulder, and this dark blue is going to be mountains from Reno. So dark means that they're all by themselves. Light colors are chickadees that co-occur with the two species. And this is like hot off the presses, so get excited. Okay, so key takeaways is that basically all of the populations differ in the number of note numbers in their song. So we're going to show population on X for our Y. Oh yeah, I already told you this. Yeah, we call co-occurring together sympatry, and when they're not together, allopatry. I try and not use those words because whatever. Okay, number of notes, everybody's different. This is not too crazy. This is what you would expect for populations that are kind of by themselves, doing their own thing. Song is typically learned, not out of the question. This is pretty standard above board. What we do see is that the mountain chickadees in Boulder sing songs that have two introductory notes, which is pretty funky. So this is going to be the proportion of songs for each individual. Remember, we have multiple songs for each individual. We're going to take out how many times in those songs that one male sings a song with two introductory notes. It's going to go from 0 to 1 because it's a proportion. So nope, 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 whoa. Right, so these mountain chickadees are singing songs with intro notes, which is weird. They also have songs that have smaller glissandos, and I apologize for using that word, but that's the word that we use. It basically is the frequency shift over the course of the note. So if you think of it as like the slurring, it's the like cheeseburger, like the cheese of the cheeseburger, if you will. You would distrust me, I'm a scientist. Okay, so we're showing the average glissando again on the Y. Big thing, huge difference. So like lots of variation in the average glissando for, again, our blackcaps from Ithaca, similar for our blackcaps from Boulder, similar for our mountain chickadees from Reno, but way smaller glissando. So they're basically not shifting pitch over the course of that first introductory note, is essentially what's happening. Everyone else has a big spread over that first intro note. And I'm going to show this because you can actually see it. So if you look at the width of basically note in the top one, note 1, the width of that bar, or the height, I don't know how tall it is really long compared to these guys. And they basically step evenly across. They're not shifting pitch at all, which is why they sound a little derpy when they go like dee, dee, dee. There's no drop in that pitch, which is pretty funky. So we can take all of those song metrics and put them into a pretty fancy model, which we call principal component analysis. Don't worry about what that means. The key thing is that points that are closer together on this graph are more similar. The further away the points, the more different. Our populations stay the same. Here's our graph. And our sympatric mountains are all the way over here. So really different from everybody. Not surprising that they're different from the sympatric blackcaps from Boulder. That's pretty standard. What is really cool, though, is that we see for blackcaps, the sympatric blackcaps overlapping with the allopatric blackcaps. So they're not shifting their song at all. And what's even cooler is that the two allopatric populations basically sing the same. So the mountains from Reno and the blackcaps from Ithaca aren't changing their song. They essentially sing the same. And what this matches is our expectations of a really fancy thing called character displacement, which is if we measure some trait, in this case it's song, and we look at the number of individuals that have that trait. When two species are closely related and first come into contact, they overlap a lot in that trait and potentially compete. But that's not really great. Competition is usually really costly, so there's a lot of evolutionary pressure to shift one species in that trait space out. And typically, this is the subordinate species. Now, excitingly, oh, no, I'm not there yet. Okay, sorry. There's two reasons this might happen. The first is to reduce aggression, or the second might be to prevent hybridization, if hybridization is costly. Okay, so we know that mountain chickadees are the subordinate species based on a lot of people watching a lot of these birds at fevers. So in blackcaps, males are more dominant than females, and when blackcaps and mountains come together, blackcaps are always dominant over mountains. So it matches that mountain song is the one that's shifting, whereas the blackcap song is staying the same. I also showed you some brief little teasers about mountain and blackcaps chickadee hybridizing at the continental level, right? So if we expect that they're preventing hybridization or singing differently so they don't hybridize, they should probably hybridize in Boulder. But do they? Okay, we're back to the damn boxes. So I put up all these boxes, and I checked them for 3 years. This is what it looks like when a female is excavating that cavity. They construct a fir and moss nest inside the cavity. they do this pretty quickly. These are just cute bird pics. This is what it looks like on the inside when they're still constructing. When she's finished but hasn't finished laying, she covers her eggs. So there's about 5 eggs in there that she's covered with a fur cap. When she's finished, she pops off that top to begin incubation. Mountain chickadees here on the left, black-capped on the right. They do look a little different. The mountain chickadee nests are fluffier. They have more fur. That probably makes sense. They're colder. We call this the gummy bear stage. Yeah. And as they grow, the cup expands with them. I know, it's so cute. When they're 12 days old, we take them out of the nest and we collect a bunch of measurements, including blood, which is important. And we also catch the adults. They get color bands, so we can keep track of who's who, and that nice federal medal band. Okay. So I put up 400 nest boxes, thereabouts, monitored about 125 nests, caught a whole bunch of chickadees. And the biggest thing is that I collected blood from all these individuals. And the key reason we want blood is bird blood has DNA in it. Our blood doesn't really, so don't get too excited, but bird blood does. I extracted all of this DNA. I then sequenced it. I'm going to curse over this, but if you want to talk about it, it's pretty exciting. This part involves lasers, which is pretty fun. Goes off to a sequencer, comes back, spits out a whole bunch of A's, T's, C's, and G's that we then input into a computer and spend thousands of computational hours analyzing. This is what that lab work looks like. It's pretty nice. Some days are really great, some days not so great. That was a bad day. They're numbered. It wasn't that bad. And I do like to point out, I'm going to show you whole genomes from 500 chickadees, and I'm going to throw it up here like it's nothing, but I like to point out at this step that computational genomics is incredibly computationally expensive. This step alone takes about a month and a half. And again, that's one of many. So I'm going to throw up here like it's nothing, but this is a huge computational sink. So cherish it. Okay, so before I showed you nest boxes, these are now nests. So every place where we had a breeding chickadee over 3 years. And I'm going to show you some genomic data. The take home is that hybrids are rare. So I'm going to show you what's called a triangle plot, because it looks like a triangle. Our x-axis is basically a measure of how hybridy that bird is, and then the y-axis is how mismatched they are at each allele along their genome. All you really need to take away is that blackcaps are going to be down here, mountains are going to be down here, and anything that we call an F1, it stands for filial first generation, is going to be up there. Okay, cool, so that's our data. That's really exciting. We found an F1. She was a little wonky. She's got a little faint supercilium, and she only built half of a nest. So this is basically that moss section, but she's lacking that fur cup. And then she sat on this box for 2 weeks, didn't lay any eggs before she abandoned. So she was a little messed up. I'm not going to go through this today. I'm going to tell you just to trust me that these are also hybrids. But if you have questions, I can talk to you about that. And the other thing is that all the birds that we actually caught have these hybrid indexes that are higher than we would expect. Shown a different way, they're all above their allopatric population, so potentially some amount of hybrid ancestry. And this is really cool that they hybridize because they hybridize rarely, because they overlap a lot in where they breed. So again, this is this map of nests. When I started this project, I thought that blackcaps were going to be in the city and mountains were going to be in the mountains, but that's not the case. We had breeding mountains down in the city of Boulder, and we had breeding blackcaps all the way up to about 8,000 feet, so way higher than we were expected. They also overlap in when they breed, so I'm showing you date on the X and then the number of nests that had their first egg laid on that date. For blackcaps, that's about the beginning of May, and it's about like a week and a half later for mountains, but big thing is they're overlapping in when they're breeding. But despite this, they're only hybridizing sometimes, very, very infrequently. So what it suggests is that even though both of these species overlap in when and where they breed, oh yeah, that's when. Where is the pretty, okay, whatever, anyway. They hybridize very rarely, and one reason that they might be hybridizing rarely is because song is preventing them from interbreeding. And I think this is a really interesting way of considering these really well-studied common species, because we think of chickadees, at least these black-capped in mountains, as being separated along mountain slopes. When I started, this is what the literature said was going to happen, but what I actually found is it's something more like this. And I think it really begets this question of how are these closely related, ecologically similar species coexisting? And the answer is we don't really know. I don't know, and I spent a really long time studying it. And I think that's really shocking for something even as common as a chickadee. And so in the midst of all this chickadee talk, what I really hope that I've shown you today is how a little girl from Chicago who really liked animals came to love studying birds. And along the way, she met a lot of really great, wonderful people who taught her a lot of things to build something that was a little bit science, a little bit art, and a little bit luck, while showing us that we still have a lot to learn from the natural world, especially some of the most common birds. And with that, I have a lot of people to thank who help put up boxes, let me come to their property, measure things, collaborate, funding sources, and I'll leave that up and I'll take any questions.
Two questions. Do you find any difference in the calls of the two different species?
We didn't look at that.
You didn't look at that?
Like acoustically, yeah. The mountain, like just for anecdotally, mountain chickadees are raspier.
Okay.
But in terms of like call rate, actually measuring the spectrograms, we have not looked at that.
And how many actual hybrids or offspring of hybrids did you find?
Yeah, so one F1, which was a female that didn't breed, and then when I was like, trust me for that clump, that's 10, and they're all backcross blackcaps. So they're all F1s that bred back in the direction of blackcap chickadees and then produced those. And there are in that 3 adults, and then of those 3 adults, there are 2 males, and they had 2 clutches of chicks, and in their clutches of chicks, they had 2 back crosses. So it's some chicks, some adults, yeah.
In general, with the hybrids, what did you find of their song?
Oh yeah, so yeah, we didn't look at that, right? So the weird thing about song basically is you want to make sure that you're not recording the same individual twice, and that can get really tricky. We do have a lot of birds that are color banded, but we're still operating in the city of Boulder, and I wish I had a box in every backyard in Boulder, but I don't. So there's a fair amount of gaps in where we have chickadees. So there's not a ton of overlap in this song data and that breeding data. Yeah.
Maybe this is something that a lot of people know, but you had mentioned that, you were trying to figure out why they would have the different song and the overlap, and was it sort of to prevent aggression versus preventing hybridization? So does the chickadee song, is that more for territorial establishment, or is it more for mating?
Both. I was like, thank you so much for asking. We're going to go back to chickadee social structure. So the key thing with chickadees is more dominant individuals are more attractive. So dominance is linked very much so in mate choice for both of these birds. The role that song plays is typically in territory defense. It's not really in mate choice. Chickadees are kind of weird in that they're actually pairing up right now. They pair up in the fall, and then they form these kind of like wintering flocks of multiple pair groups, and then they break back into their pairs in the spring. But they've already paired up basically starting now. So they kind of overwinter with their pairs, if you will. The key thing with whether or not we can tease apart aggression, basically preventing aggression or preventing hybridization, requires experiments, which, again, these things all take time. So that's things that people are working on right now. But that involves just a lot of playbacks and going to places where they either have, like novel places where they haven't heard the song before and seeing what their reactions are. But yeah, it's complicated to tease that apart, but experimentally is the way.
Do the Carolina, I just don't know, do the Carolina and blackcap overlaps, like do they exhibit this kind of pattern as well?
The really funky thing, again, is that song is learned. And so in the Carolina blackcap chickadee hybrid zone, it gets wild. You'll have birds that have one genetic background but are singing a different song because they're learning from their neighbors, and their neighbors happen to be whatever. So things get really mashed up in that hybrid zone. These birds just aren't hybridizing as much. It's much, much rarer. Whereas in the black-capped Carolina hybrid zone, they hybridize everywhere they come into contact. That zone stays really narrow, but within that hybrid zone, everybody is a hybrid. So that's a different system in terms of how it's shaking out. And again, because song is learned, that is what adds this kind of element of they're listening to their neighbors, they're listening to the male they hear at their territory, and so they might have one genetic background but sing a totally different song.
I think I may not have understood, but I thought I heard you say that this happened where there was some kind of effect on the climate from humans. So how does that all tie in with what?
I'll also a great question, if you'll bear with me. Yes, I can repeat the question. I pitched this whole beginning of this talk as disturbance matters, and then I didn't talk about disturbance at all. So what gives? I had a limited amount of time. So what did I want to show you? Okay, yeah, thanks, great. So when Europeans first came to Boulder, this is what it looked like, which is basically a whole bunch of grass, and you don't see trees until you get right up against the base of those mountains are known as the Flatirons, but basically the foothills. This is what Boulder looks like today. It's incredibly green, and the vast majority of that green are deciduous trees from the east that people have planted because we really like trees that fruit, and we really like leaves that change colors. And I know Colorado is pitched as colorful Colorado, but there's not a lot of tree diversity there. It's not very colorful, in my opinion. And so what we think is happening is blackcaps do really, really well in the city of Boulder because there's all these cherries and sugar maples that they can readily excavate for their cavities. And so now you have a situation where people have planted all these trees that are really, really great for blackcaps. They also put out feeders. So now there's this ready supply of food source. Blackcaps come, mountains come. Blackcaps are more dominant, outcompete. I didn't talk about this, but the mountain females prefer these more dominant blackcap males, and we think that's potentially what's playing a role in driving this hybridization. So it's this really weird nebulous impact of people have planted a bunch of trees that otherwise wouldn't be there and put out food, and they're now kind of changing the social dynamic and the status quo between these two species. So yeah, I didn't talk about this at all, but talk to me more, because I love this is, yeah. Oh.
So this is just a quick follow-up on that. I think this is a good explanation. How did you kind of rule out that pattern of, oh, we're seeing more hybrids where there's like cities and disturbances? How do you kind of distinguish that just from the phenomenon of, well, there's more people looking? So,
or the fact that we don't build cities on top of mountains. Yeah, no, these are real critiques. The question is we can't, so you're just going to have to kind of take my gentle word for it. What we are doing right now is expanding and basically having transects that run along the mountains to get at that, to see if it's basically just going up into the mountains, or instead if we can look north-south, where we're essentially controlling for elevation while minimizing people. It's complicated, and these are good, critiques.
So just to follow up my question, would you replicate something like this at other spots along the your map?
If I had infinite energy and infinite time, I would, but I think my time building boxes is done. But in theory, yes, like that would be the way to do it. And also potentially, I like to think about the fact that we talk about cities and urbanization as like a city is a city, but cities are very different. A city like Boulder is very different from a city like Chicago, for example. And so not all cities are the same. I have never seen so many chickadees in a city. Like there's a pair that breeds in the Target parking lot in Boulder, which was bizarre and gave me a lot of like, I should be working. I'm just trying to buy sheets. But yeah, in theory, you would replicate this and put this or have multiple transects in Boulder, right? I only went up one canyon, but there are about 4 canyons that stack through Boulder County. That would have been a great place also, again, to replicate. You could also make the argument that this is one species pair. So we could put this many places, but it would still be one replicate because we're just looking at blackcaps and mountain chickadees. My answer to these things is like we do the best that we can. Again, this is all just kind of inference and slowly building knowledge one step at a time. But yes, in theory, we would always replicate when possible. Thank you.